If we want to be historically exact, nationalism is liberal. Nationalism is liberal in origin. If you ask all of the historians, you look at state formation, nationalism is associated with state formation, and you cannot associate or oppose liberalism and nationalism. Nationalism is just the first stage on the rise to liberal empires. And so I think I would differ with Yoram there. And so therefore I think that to call what's happening in Europe nationalist is, I think, not just bad PR, I think it's wrong historically and philosophically. So why are we against liberalism? And I rather enjoyed Roger Scruton's remarks earlier, where he talked about privileging we above I and creating the conditions for the flourishing of place. Because modern extreme liberalism is insecurity at the most extreme level. It's created enormous widening levels of economic insecurity and also cultural insecurity. It has created elites allying with minorities to create a new phenomenon in Europe, which is threatened majorities. And I think it's wrong to talk about those threatened majorities through the guise of nationalism. Why? Because, as Mr. Orban said earlier, what those who resist this liberal hegemony should be arguing for is solidarity, which liberalism never argues for. And that solidarity, which begins with family, which is what Burke talks about, but it doesn't end with family. It extends a circle of widening sympathy from your family to your neighbourhood to your place, and yes, to the world beyond. That is European idealism. That is what those who oppose the current liberal hegemony should be arguing for. And I think if they mistakenly associate their views with nationalism, they associate and message their views with something that one might argue has been wholly destructive for Europe, and indeed wholly destructive for human progress. So I don't have a Protestant reading of the Hebrew Bible. I have an understanding of the Jewish blessing as the first people to introduce universalism into the world. The very first people to say, actually, there is a universal above and beyond, not just me and you, but the king. And that's why the Jewish prophets came in from the desert and said to the kings of Israel, you too are subject to this law. And that's why the Jewish Bible talks about Judaism being the light for all nations. And as somebody who thinks Western civilization is real, I would also argue, again contra Roger, that Western civilization is an idea. And it is an idea promulgated by both Judaism, Christianity, and Greece of a universal that binds us all. That's what Plato argued, that's what Aristotle argued. Plato thought it was up there, Aristotle thought it was down there, but they never differed that there was such a thing called a universal. And what I like in what they do in Poland and what they do in Hungary is they care for all of their people. One of the most unresearched aspects of Eastern European populism, as those who like to slander it talk about, is the fact that they use the state to secure all of their people through family policies that are wildly popular that nobody talks about. Whereas in the West, do you know who taxes the family most in the OECD, right at the point when they have children? The UK. Because we only prosper and forward a form of individualism that we, at certain points of our lives, as we form families and form bonds, we pay an enormous penalty if we're not like that. The coming politics of Europe should not be understood, and those who are arguing for it should not be understood as opposed to idealism. If the common enemy is liberalism of the most extreme sort, and I'm a liberal in many ways, but my liberalism comes from conservatism, because I think you first secure the good and then you're liberal about it. You don't just first say there's no such thing as the good, I believe in human will, because no good can then ever be thought. That is our true mission. That is what holds us together. If you look at the Gilets jaunes, what's going on there? The latest sociological research shows that actually what's happened to those citizens is they've been moved out of their public housing projects, they've been moved out by migrants, and it's not migrants' fault, I'm in favour of including everybody within our new settlement, by what the French call the battle of the eyes, and they've been displaced to the periphery, and this is a class-based conflict where they say we have no place and no role in modern France, and nobody cares for them. So if we are to overturn the extreme liberalism that we see exemplified in people like Macron and in Germany in the form of the euro, it has to be for something that isn't reducible to self-interest. It has to be, as Mr. Orban talked about, for a form of subsidiarity. But you know what subsidiarity is? Decisions at the level that are most appropriate. And that is the new form of idealism, because it will allow us to work together, yes, indeed, as a group of nations, but we are not to understand those nations as a reduction to something like race. Indeed, if you look at Eastern Europe, go back 100 years, they're among the most heterogeneous nations in the whole of Europe. And it's only the great wars of the 20th century that has produced the type of ethnic universality and homogeneity that we have now. But if we are to defend Western civilization against those who oppose it, we cannot do that by retreating to a particular and trying to defend our locality against the civilizational threats of Russia, China, and radical Islam. We have to believe in the European civilizational project, but just don't understand it as this form of liberal totalitarianism that is so dangerous and that holds sway. If I was doing political advice to this movement, I would say, why do you hand your imperialism over to liberalism? Why do you let them be the idealists? This is a contested idea for what should govern us. And what really these new European movements should do is found their idealism and their hope and dreams in a Europe that cares for all of its people and defends its culture, not as a form of warfare, but as a form of integration, acceptance, not having multiculturalism, but having broad patterns whereby people can join in. When Joseph Conrad made a decision to move from Poland to England, he called it a moral decision. When Frederick Douglass, the great black American revolutionary, left America, he said, "I'm leaving Republican tyranny for monarchical liberty." What did he mean? He meant that I am joining something that believes in something. There is no liberation for us unless we decide on the good and the ought that we believe in and that we uphold. There is no just horizontal governance without a just vertical pole. That is what Greece has taught us, that is what Israel has taught us, that is what Christianity has taught us. That is the Western civilizational project. If we surrender that, if we surrender universalism to liberalism that believes in nothing, that upholds nothing but power, we surrender everything. It is time for this movement to be idealist, to believe in ideas, and to believe in the European civilization as a product of those ideas so it can defend it, because liberalism won't. Thank you.